All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today, I'm going to be reviewing the nonfiction book, The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. This is a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. This is a book about the Battle of Fort Sumter. Jesus Christ, I just finished the book. I'll have to edit that out. Okay, so yeah, Fort Sumter. I do know what this book is about, guys. So Erik Larson, one of my favorite nonfiction writers. In fact, he wrote one of my top 5 favorite nonfiction books of all time, The Devil in the White City. So if you've read that, I have also met Erik Larson, and he did sign most of my books right there. You can see to Brian and his signature. So one of my favorite writers of all time. He did a great job with everything I've read so far. And now we're to his newest book, The Demon of Unrest. This is, what does it say here? Well, I already read that. I already read what it's about. Fort Sumter. Again, we'll edit some of this stuff out. So the author's introduction. We start off with the author's introduction where he wanted to do a book about the Civil War and Fort Sumter, specifically because he was trying to ask himself, how could Americans, friends, neighbors, people that knew each other, had fought side by each other in other battles, how could they resort to killing each other over politics? And it was the Civil War. I mean, I've been to a lot of the Civil War sites. Been to Gettysburg. In fact, I did some book reviews from Gettysburg. You know, like the Killer Angels I reviewed while I was at Gettysburg, which is one of the great Civil War books of all time. Pulitzer Prize winning, by the way. So he wanted some answers to this question. You know, he had just watched all the politics in America taking place, and how we're always, just since the dawn of time, the world has been full of people who are willing to kill each other over political opinions, both before and after the Civil War. He's just kind of like, well, I want to see what it was that, caused the Civil War. And one of the, Fort Sumter, which was kind of like, how did Fort Sumter spark the Civil War? Because it was kind of the battle that really kind of tipped the tide to say, okay, there's going to be a war here now. So we get to learn through all of this book the history of Fort Sumter, the history of kind of how Abraham Lincoln came into power, and how the South want us to succeed from the North and create their own nation. That's kind of the history we're getting here. Now, Fort Sumter itself, and I'm not going to give spoiler. Well, I won't give spoilers away, but it's kind of world history, so you could just Wikipedia the spoilers if you want. And maybe some of you already have read this book, and probably most of you know how this ends. But I'll kind of vaguely keep away from that. But Fort Sumter itself was named after a gentleman, Thomas Sumter, who was a Revolutionary War hero. Now, it was a Union stronghold, and in South Carolina, which was part of the southern states, right? Part of the states that want to secede from the Confederacy. Now, it's at the time of this book, it's a Union stronghold, but it's surrounded by Confederate military. It's cut off from the North. The guy that is running Fort Sumter is a guy named Robert Anderson. He's in New York. He's from New York. He's a commander. He kind of runs the thing. One of the things about the surrounding area of North Carolina, and South Carolina, every time I say North Carolina, I mean South Carolina. Anyway, but I get those two confused. I've been to both of them, but it's just to me they're just the same place. Okay, anyway, so the slaves in South Carolina far outnumbered the white people by a huge margin. And this phenomenon was known as the Demon of Unrest. That's where we get the title of the book. So that's kind of where the title of the book is. It's like, okay, we've got a lot of plantation owners and slaveholders but they are outnumbered by the slaves by a huge margin. And it's kind of like there's a tipping point at some point where this isn't going to sustain itself, right? Okay, at some point, the slaves are going to be like, I think we outnumber these guys. Maybe, and so it caused a lot of tension in the South. And, of course, the North, um, well, not only did it cause a lot of tension, but it caused a lot of imbalance of wealth and power, of course. If you've got slave owner and slave holder, there's an enormous imbalance of power and wealth. And this is the tipping point of most revolutions, okay? So the Southern slaveholders threatened to secede from the U.S., especially if Abraham Lincoln the Republican Abraham Lincoln, if he were to win the nomination for the White House from the Republican Party, they were just like, okay, that's it, we're done. Because they knew that Abraham Lincoln was big into freeing the slaves, keeping the nation as one nation, not splintering it up. And they were just like, no, we're not going to. If Abraham Lincoln becomes the Republican nominee, no. And especially if he becomes president, no, we're going to succeed. And this was all of this was kind of led by a bunch of really bad people. Like, one of the characters the book focuses on a lot is this slaver and serial rapist, the Democrat James Henry Hammond, worst of the worst type of humans. I was like, as I was reading this book, I'm like, I can't believe this guy is such a piece of shit. And I actually Wikipedia'd it. I was just like, I'm not gonna find out, because Wikipedia tends to slant heavily to making Democrats look like fucking angels all the time. They couldn't even make this guy look good. No, he was a piece of shit. And then one of his compatriots in his reign of horrific things was Edmund Ruffin, who was also a bloodthirsty radical secessionist, like an ardent. I mean, he stirred up so much trouble. I mean, some of these guys were just like evil. I mean, the big starting of the Ku Klux Klan and type evil. And they were just not going to let the Republican nominee, Abraham Lincoln, get a foothold in anything. And they just tried to destroy everything good about humanity. And then, as we go through this book, there's a lot of different things like William Seward, Secretary of State, kind of like he's not really, I mean, he's a guy that was sort of a rival of Lincoln that became kind of a ally of Lincoln. And then we've got Mary Boykin is another character in this who was married to a slaveholder. And she kind of equates her own marriage, just the way her husband treats her as a female. She kind of equates her own marriage as slavery in and of itself, which is kind of like an overall theme of how the power-hungry Southern plantation owners, the power imbalance, not only was it the slaves and the plantation owners' power imbalance, but it was the plantation owner and everybody in their circle, their wives, their children, everybody was beneath them. Like they we see part of this story through her eyes. And then we've got the Pinkertons, who of course are famous for investigating Old West. The Pinkertons were big in the Old West, chasing down all the bad guys in the Old West. Well, it started a lot earlier than that. I mean, they were involved on investigation. I mean, they investigated Lincoln, the assassination of Lincoln, and all of that. And then of course in this book, we get the battle of Fort Sumter itself near the end, as all this builds up to a climax. And it's just a fascinating look at how the Civil War started and how all the different factions and players were in place and how they all behaved and things that they said and did to instigate this thing that popped off in Fort Sumter. And we get a lot of stuff about Harper's Ferry, which was kind of I've been to Harper's Ferry, beautiful place. I really enjoyed my time in Harper's Ferry, which was in West Virginia or Virginia. It might have been Pennsylvania. It was like in that little part of West Virginia, I think, that's just kind of hanging. Anyway, This is a great book. 10 out of 10. I got to start reading a lot more nonfiction. In fact, I'm probably going to make a concerted effort to read at least one nonfiction per month, because I just forget how much I enjoy it and how much you can learn from it. So this is a 10 out of 10. As every single Erik Larson book I've ever read is a 10 out of 10. Just one of my favorite nonfiction writers of all time.